What's going on, everybody? Thanks for coming out, clicking on this video. We're going to go through some basics of foam rolling and mobility. My goal with this class is to allow you to have the basic knowledge you need to take care of yourself at home. So if you've been going through care in our office, our main goal is to correct your posture. So we do that with adjustments, traction, therapeutic exercises, and massage therapy in office. But there's also things you can do at home. A lot of the times these muscles, these tissues need some help to come along for the ride with the spine because we're stuck in certain postures all day long. Tissues get stuck and locked and they need some help to get back open. So what we're going to do today is explain exactly what we're doing when we do myofascial release on ourselves, how to use some of these tools, and then I'll be basically walking you through different regions of the body, and we'll get into specific muscle groups and break it down as we go on. So the first thing I want to show you guys is a few tools that you'll need for this class. Pretty basic stuff. One is going to be a lacrosse ball. So it's a very dense rubber ball, does not squeeze very much. Tennis ball could work to start, but ideally you want to get one of these. It has a very dense feel to it, and it won't compress when you lay down on it. So we want something to give enough force to get into the tissue to allow that tissue to spread open when we apply a given force. Another great tool is a foam roller. So this is a small foam roller. You could also get one that would be like a larger foam roller, full size, full length. Now these aren't anything fancy. You don't need a bunch of the ridges, grooves, knobs on them. Just these smooth, dense foam rollers will do perfectly fine. You can get these on Amazon, get them from different stores, I don't know, Walmart, Target, most places sell them right now, but usually online you'll be able to find them pretty easily. The next tool is more of a specific tool. This is called a back buddy. I've had this thing for probably 15 years now. And there's other tools like this, Theracane would be another option, but basically this is an extension of your hands where you'll be able to reach parts of your body in your back that you typically couldn't, or get into hamstring groups where it's a little more difficult to get into those regions just either using your hands or the ball. It has a little smaller surface area, so we'll be able to get into more specific points. So this is a great tool. Again, these are found online. They're a little more expensive, probably upwards of $20 to $30. But again, they last forever. This thing is unbreakable. It'd be funny if I snapped it right now, but like I said, I've had it like 15 years. So great investment, great tools. Like for around $70, you'd have an awesome home massage therapist program for yourself. So let's get into it and go through our lecture here. So what we're working with when we do these myofascial release techniques is something called fascia. So what is fascia? Fascia is basically a connective tissue that surrounds everything in your body. So muscles, organs, nerves, lymphatic nodes, veins, arteries, everything. Without fascia, we'd basically be a big puddle of goop on the ground. But we're not. We have structure, we have balance. And what this fascia allows is what's called tensegrity. So it holds us in space and allows us to move and be suspended. Now, what can happen to fascia is that it can start to become adhered in certain areas. So why do we care about fascia? Mainly because movement is life. If we're not moving, we're dying, essentially, right? So if we're stuck in certain positions like this all day long, we're going to be stuck in this position. This decreases our lung capacity. It can compress internal organs. It can put our spine into a position where it's stretching our spinal cord and it's applying stress, preventing the transmission from your brain to the rest of your body and your body up to your brain. So we want to keep all these tissues moving so that our organs, our tissues are all functioning properly and that we're able to move freely without pain and dysfunction. So the body in motion remains in motion until acted on by an equal opposite force. So I think that's the right phrase. Somewhere in physics I learned that. So the idea is that we want to keep moving so that we maintain that movement and we don't start to have movement dysfunctional patterns, which eventually lead to problems in our health. All right, so let's talk a little bit about adhesions and where they start. So there's two different types of adhesions, one being tissue where it gets locked in a shortened position. Now this is typically when you're in one position for a long period of time. This can also happen when we're doing some kind of overuse of a certain muscle group. So basically the muscle just learns how to shorten and stay locked in a shortened position. But typically this is found when we're in our seated postures. And a good example would be like our hamstrings. We're locked in a shortened position. What happens is that the muscle gets stuck. And then eventually the muscle is not able to stretch to its proper length. So when you get up from that seated position, now it's going to pull on your pelvis, pull on your spine, and start to add pressures where there shouldn't be, which can eventually lead to dysfunction, which could eventually lead to problems with your health. So next would be the locked long. This is basically where a great example is in your upper back, where we come forward and we stretch the muscles of our spine, we lengthen them, and they get locked in that lengthened position. What happens is that this affects the muscle's ability to contract. So if the muscle can't contract, it's not able to withstand certain postures, and it's going to be very difficult for you to even get back into that upright posture if you've been stuck here and now the muscle cannot fire. So basically it inhibits the muscle's ability to contract, which is a problem. Now the important thing about this is that adhesions can form in fascia in as little as 20 minutes. So if you've looked back at some of my exercise videos, like my positional release or Brugger's positions, when I talked about finding neutral, so basically you want to take micro breaks every 20-30 minutes for just about 10 to 15 seconds. That prevents the fascia from locking up and your body from getting stuck in a certain position. I know it's hard when you're working on computers, you get in your zone, next thing you know, 3-4 hours have gone by and you haven't even moved out of one position. So it's very important to either set an alarm on your phone or something where it'll kind of nudge you into the reminder zone of, hey, I gotta move for a second. It doesn't have to be long, just come in, reverse the position, and go back to where you were. So all it takes is a little bit of movement to prevent that locking, but once things are locked in place, it's gonna take a little more work to get things back opened up. So this is a great picture of locked long, locked short. So again, awesome examples would be like hamstrings typically are locked in a shortened position, and the erectors in the back are locked in a lengthened position. When we look at the front body, typically that's going to be locked in a shortened position in the front. So we're going to get more into detail about the different trains of fascia that run throughout the body and where certain areas are going to get locked or stuck, whether it's long or short. It's not super important, but I just want you guys to know that things can get locked either from being in a lengthened position or in a shortened position, and it can also happen from injury or repetitive use. All right, so for all my Metallica fans out there, we got seek and destroy method. So whenever we're working with adhesions in the fascial system, we want to find the adhesion and then we want to remove the adhesion. So there are a few different steps I want you to think about as you're going through this. One is going to be first to scan the area that we're working on. So that's going to require us to use whatever tool we're using, whether that's a ball, foam roller, Theracane, our hands, whatever that is. We want to scan the muscle group, scan the fascial system, find a tender point. So that requires us to kind of go back and forth with the fascia, mobilize it that way, go up and down, and try to find where there's a restriction for movement or a slight tenderness to the touch. After we've scanned the area, we find our tender point, we're going to basically localize a point that creates a pain of, so on a pain scale of 0 to 10, 0 being basically nothing, like I slapped you with a feather. 10 being like I slammed a brick down on your hand and now that's shattered. I would never do those things. However, that's kind of the framework I want you to think about. So you want to get into that zone where it's like good hurt, where you get on it and you're like, ooh man, I feel that. It feels good though. Kind of hurts, but it feels good. Like that's where you want to be. It's like a dull, aching sensation that kind of spreads outward from the center of that point. We don't want it to be sharp. We don't want it to be shooting. We don't want it to be throbbing. Now sometimes you might get a referral pain where you'll be pressing in one area and it'll shoot, kind of like radiate down into a distant site. That's different than like an electrical shock sensation or a throbbing, pulsing sensation where it feels like you're maybe on a nerve or an artery. Typically we want to stay off those areas. And we want to, again, aim for that 5, maybe 6 out of 10 on a pain scale so that you're getting a therapeutic response. Once you start getting outside of that pain scale, like 7, 8, 9, when you start making not so great faces when you're on the place, your body's going to start to restrict and contract, and it's not going to allow you to get the opening that you want. Once we found our point, we've gotten into that good hurt zone, we're going to now increase tension. So in order to remove fascial adhesions, we have to create a shearing force in the tissue. So what that means is that we're going to use our tool to pin down the superficial tissues, and then we're going to increase tension internally by doing certain body movements, which will then stretch in the opposite direction. So we're basically pinning down the tissue with our tool and then gliding tissue underneath to then separate those fascial adhesions and start to break them open. Once you're there, we've got that. We got our 5 to 6 out of 10. We created some shearing force. Now all you have to do is breathe. You hang out, deep breaths in and out. Ideally, you're going to be breathing in through your nose, which will help activate your parasympathetic nervous system, which helps to calm your system and get out of that fight or flight state where everything's contracted and guarded. Hold and breathe. We're going to do that for about 1 to maybe maximum 3 minutes. You don't want to go beyond that. If you hang out on one point for longer than that, you might bruise the tissue. Even doing this for 1 to 2 minutes, you're going to feel sore for the next day or two in the area that we worked. You go longer than that, you're going to start to bruise tissue, and now you're going to have maybe 5, 6 days of soreness afterwards where you're not going to be able to treat the area again. So these types of treatments are done a lot more effectively if they're done short spurts, frequently throughout the day. So maybe you do your session 1, 2, maybe 3 times throughout the day versus like one hour session you might do 3 or 4 10-minute sessions. So ideally you do less time on the point, you'll get a better result. So each point, each area that we're working, you're going to find 1, 2, maybe 3 points. So ideally you're just going to pick the most tender point and stick with that one. All right, so a great test for learning how the body is connected is before we do any work, a great test of testing your fascial restrictions is to bend down, touch your toes, and feel where you feel restriction. So it could be in the low back, it could be in the hamstrings, it could be in the bottoms of your feet. Wherever that is, just take note of where that is, give it a scale 1 to 10, and then that's your baseline. After you're done doing your first session of myofascial work, I want you to repeat that. Bend down, touch your toes, and then notice the change. You'll notice it's going to be a little bit easier depending on the different muscle groups that we work. And for that test specifically, that's going to be our superficial back line. Everything's connected from your toes up to the top of your head. So this image here is from Tom Myers' anatomy training. So Tom Myers came from a group of therapy which was called Rolfing, which is a myofascial therapy that focuses mostly on deep fascial adhesions and restoring posture. What this shows is when they did dissections on cadavers, they realized that certain tissues were connected with tissues that were nearby. And what it did is it created trains throughout the body. And what it shows is that all these tissues interact together. A great example of this clinically for me was when I was working on a patient who had plantar fasciitis. It wasn't really getting better, and what I ended up finding was the person had a lot of restrictions right above their eyebrow, which is actually an attachment point for one of the tendons that comes across the skull that comes through here, which connects the superficial back line all the way into the bottom of the foot. We started to open up some of these adhesions through here, and the foot started to get better, and it actually stopped hurting forever. So very rare case in that scenario, but it showed me how everything was connected. So a lot of the times now people are dealing with plantar fasciitis, I'm working in the calf, I'm working in the hamstring, I'm working in the low back. I'm not just working on the bottom of the foot. And that's where we'll get better clinical results. If we start thinking of the body as a whole, it's all connected, and we can have restrictions in distant areas that affect the area that's hurting. So instead of chasing pain in that one spot, think globally and how can we relieve tension in our system. All right, so now we're going to get into our videos for specific regions. We'll start with our superficial back line and we'll kind of work our way through all the different fascial lines of the body. Now it's important, if you need to go back and review the steps for the seek and destroy method, go back and review it. Don't hurt yourself doing these. It's very important that you start light, work your way up, and also that we're creating that tension. We're not just rolling over tissue. That's really not going to do a whole lot. You got to create that compression and then create that shearing force for those fascial adhesions to open up. Here we go. It's fun time. Let's do this.